Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another session of the CSPC interview series, and this session focused on inclusive excellence in science post-COVID-19. And we are pleased to be joined by Dr. Malinda Smith and Dr. Imogen, both academics and both leaders of the EDI in Canada and internationally. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let me read a brief bio of you two, and then we'll get into some discussion and conversation. Dr. Malinda Smith has joined just recently, appointed to the University of Calgary, appointed as Vice Provost, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, effective August 1st, apparently, in the University of Calgary. But she is coming from the University of Alberta, where she's currently now a professor in the Department of Political Science, conducting research and teaching in the areas of international and comparative politics, critical race studies, and gender and politics, and serving as a Provost Fellow in Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Policy in the Office of the Provost at the University of Alberta. Dr. Smith is a nationally recognized leader in EDI. She's widely regarded for her contributions to developing next generation equity policies, including several task force reports and diversity roles in the post-secondary sector in particular, and various levels of government. She has held various other positions, including the first person of color to serve on the executive of the Federation of the Humanities and Social Sciences as Vice President Equity. She earned her PhD in International Relations and Political Philosophy from the University of Alberta. Welcome, Dr. Smith, to the CSPC sessions. And I believe this is your first encounter with us. So we have to have a special welcome to you.
Thank you.
Okay, and Dr. Imogen, no stranger to CSPC. She was the founding dean of the Faculty of Science at Ryerson University. She's a professor in the Department of Chemistry and Biology, and also an affiliate scientist in the Li Ka-shing Knowledge Institute at St. Michael's Hospital, where her research group studies the biology of drug transporters that facilitate the entry of anti-cancer and antiviral drugs into the cells. She earned her PhD from University of Victoria in BC. And in addition to her work as a research scientist, Dr. Ko is internationally recognized as Canadian thought leader in the area of equity, diversity, and inclusion in STEM fields in particular. She has advised academia, government, and industry on best practices and approaches to improve EDI in STEM, particularly in the Canadian post-secondary education sector. And she has written and spoken about these issues extensively in various platforms, including the Globe and Mail, iPolitics, CBC, and the most important ones, CSPC. She has numerous recognitions and received awards, including recognized by WXN as one of Canada's top 100 women. She's the president of the Canadian Molecular Bioscience Society and sits on various boards, including Michael Garrison Hospital and the Canadian Mining Innovation. Welcome, Dr. Ko, to CSPC.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here.
Excellent. Okay. So why don't I start off with this question about your role as a thought leader in the field of EDI. You are researchers, you are academics, but you have also become the leaders and thought leaders in the EDI field. I want to ask each of you your journey, how to get to this stage, because that might be very inspiring and informative for especially our young scientists and audience. Maybe you can start with Dr. Smith.
Okay, thanks. So, I mean, in my bio, you laid out some of the kind of paths that I've taken, where my area of research, as you noted, is in international relations and comparative politics. So I'm a political scientist. So when I began my academic journey, I had no plans to be working in this area. And in fact, when you look at most of us who are seen as leaders, I guess, in EDI, we came to this actually through our academic work. It was actually seen initially as service, not very well valued, or as something that was on the side of one's academic work. I think over the course of 25 years, I've seen EDI, including my own role, shift from one of recognizing it merely a service or something you believe or something that's an attitude or belief to actually recognizing EDI as knowledges, a body of research, and actually skills and skill sets. And so I think if there's one lesson I've learned from that journey is that it's not enough just to believe in EDI or to even write about EDI, that we actually need to think about practices, including what constitutes best practices, what constitutes knowledges that actually leads transformation. So I think that journey through academia, from a student to a graduate student to a professor, actually, and to be sitting at leadership tables have taught me then the ways in which inequities are developed and persist. And then how difficult it is actually to create a more equitable academy.
Thank you. Dr. Ko, over to you.
Yes, well, Dr. Smith has outlined, a path that I think I can relate to as well. From a very early age, I had a passion for science, a curiosity around how the world worked, and I was very fortunate to have support in pursuing that sort of passion for science and discovery. But at the same time, I was very aware, and partly because of the way I was raised, I think the values that were instilled in me, I was very aware that not everybody got to do what I like to do. And sometimes even I didn't get to do what I wanted to do for very arbitrary reasons around gender, in my case. And so for a very long time, I was aware that there were barriers, that there were limitations that were completely arbitrary and based on nothing more than some kind of characteristic of somebody that limited people's participation. I came to Canada as an international graduate student to do my graduate work. So I'm a proud immigrant. But I'm very aware that as an immigrant, I'm not treated the same way that other immigrants to this country are treated on the basis of my accent and the color of my skin. And so my professional practice as an academic scientist has been very richly informed by, my observational skills, my analytical skills around who is doing science, the whole enterprise of science, who is asking questions, who is making decisions, what the reward structures look like. And it's very clear that there is a whole scholarship around that. There is a whole research field around that we can look to. We can use research, analytics to study ourselves, to create better structures that will actually leverage talent and give us better outcomes. So, so there's sort of two interwoven parts of my journey, which are my passion for discovery science and my sort of analysis, my scholarship, my self-motivated, self-directed scholarship around social justice issues, and the fact that we can do better, must do better, informed very richly by the social scientists and by the humanities, which tell us so much about how we act as human beings, which is why it's so important that we have these kinds of discussions.
Excellent, thank you. Before going to the next question, I just want to mention that we have 109 participants currently in the room. Welcome everyone on board, and thank you for sharing your time with us and listening to this very insightful conversation. And we will begin our Q&A within the next perhaps around 10 minutes or so, and where you can write your questions in the Q&A box in the bottom of your Zoom screen. And please do not use chat. Use chat only if you have technical difficulties. Q&A is the section that you can write your questions. And as I said, we turn to you in about 10 minutes or so. And currently our participants number raised to 111, just to let you know. Okay, so the next question is, I want to ask you if you could elaborate, both of you, on how excellence and inclusion can balance out each other. How do you see them as the pillars of science excellence and not in competition with each other? Maybe we can start Dr. Ko first this time.
Oh, gosh. Well, I get this question quite often, that somehow equity issues are going to lower the bar. Particularly from scientists and across different disciplines. Somehow we're lowering the bar because we're, being intentional about reaching out to a broader range of humanity. And I always say, well, that's absolutely nonsense. We want to leverage all the talent. We want to tap into all the intellectual capacity that we have in the broadest range of humanity, because we know it's everywhere. You know, there is nothing specifically, there's no evidence for any specific talent that sits with a particular demographic in theoretical physics, let's say. The talents are spread throughout humanity. So in fact, if anything, if you're not embedding equity, you're entrenching mediocrity. So if you really want excellence, you have to be intentional about going after it from the entire spectrum of humanity. And that's really what we're trying to do.
Excellent. Dr. Smith?
Yeah, well, to add to that, I mean, I think this is an important question. The assumption that when you, if you increase excellence, you actually have to decrease diversity. In a way, that's another way of putting it around, that excellence somehow means it's less diversity or less inclusion. And I think that the problem with that is it's premised on a notion of excellence that's based on exclusion or exclusivity. And it presupposes that certain demographic groups, more than others, have excellence, right? And or that excellence is sometimes a limited quantity or quality that only few can have. And I mean, I know that Universities Canada has released its 6 principles of inclusion. It borrows those principles from a whole body of research that was done by the American Association of American Colleges and Universities. The Royal Society has now incorporated these inclusive principles. But I think at the heart of it is the recognition that, in fact, and I think that one that universities have not been as good at as articulating as I think we need to be, is that diversity actually and inclusivity actually enhances knowledge, that it actually it enables excellence. And so whether that's with our students, that demographically diverse students actually enhances our teaching and learning, that demographic diversity improves our research teams. It means we ask better questions. It means we are able to deal with broader sectors of the population in terms of the results. It also means then that our juries make better decisions because they take longer, they ask more questions. It means that our leadership teams in universities, in the granting councils, in Parliament, that they are all the better precisely because of diversity. And I actually think the counter side is one we actually need to think more about, whether homogeneity actually undermines excellence, leads to mediocrity, leads to less questions being asked. And so I want to turn the tables on this idea that homogeneity is somehow associated with excellence, and that there's any kind of correlation at all between these kinds of things. But I think inclusive excellence then is a way of thinking about how these two terms, which are seen as opposite often, interact in ways that actually makes what we do better and improves actually social science, humanities, fine arts. So I think that's the work we have to do in the academy, is to expand upon the ways in which this inclusive excellence matters, but also how the practice matters. Is we're good at articulating principles, less so at the practice of living and embodying those principles.
Excellent, thank you. I think from very early on right now, we have to book 2 of you for another session to extensively discuss this, to see how we are doing in Canada compared to international community. And since we have started, a kind of campaign as of 2015 about this issue, but this session, we want to focus a little bit about COVID-19 impact. But I want to get your confirmation for the next round on expanding our discussions on this very important issues generally and how we do right now in Canada. But allow me to come back to COVID-19, which is the focus of today's session. And I want to ask you 2 parts question. First, I want to ask about the impact of COVID-19, and then the second part is about how we are dealing with that challenge. But first, on the impact of COVID, it is always referred as it has a disproportionate impact on women and minorities. And I want to ask you, please elaborate on that, what it means, especially for when it comes to science community, for example, female researchers, scientists from minority groups, what it means that it has a disproportionate impact on those groups. Any of you who want to start?
So if we're talking about science, if Malinda, that's okay with you, I'll
Sure.
I think, you know, science is not done in a vacuum. Science is done within a societal structure, culture context. And so we already know that women carry a disproportionate burden of caring, whether it be childcare or elder care. We also know that women and racialized communities are often frontline. We've seen this in terms of essential workers and therefore are more at risk. So in that sense, there's no real surprise that we're seeing that reflected in the academy and in scientific practice. We know, and there's some data beginning to come out, that there's a decrease in submission rates for women for a variety of disciplines across the sciences. I suspect it's reflected in the social sciences as well. And so it's really no surprise that the impact is being felt the most by people that do the majority of caregiving, which is predominantly in our structure still women. I will say, though, if you are a parent of small children or a parent of school-age children, it's still having an impact. So the impact is broad. The impact is variable. If you are a member of adjunct faculty or sessional, we know that those are much higher proportions of women and racialized. So the precarious nature of adjunct work is now even more precarious, and that's impacting predominantly those demographics. We also know that we don't always have the healthiest kind of graduate student relationship or any relationship. Some very worrying stories coming out of students feeling pressured to go back into the lab, to go back to the bench by PIs or by supervisors who really want to get those research results out. And that can be men and women as supervisors. And so there is the issues, the pressures, the impacts reflect many of the things that we are seeing in broader society. And we have to remember that culture, context are incredibly important. If you don't have EI principles embedded in your culture and context, you are going to see these kinds of impacts. So, so it's affecting people's research careers, it's affecting their productivity, it's affecting their mental health. There's a lot of anxiety, it's affecting their security, job security. It's affecting the teaching quality, right? If we actually had inclusive teaching embedded as a fundamental design principle and everybody was trained and hired to, and facilitated to do that, we wouldn't be having some of the discussions we're having about how to accommodate certain students when we go, you know, we go to online delivery in the fall. So the impacts are substantial and across the board to accepting a very small, privileged, entitled demographic.
Dr. Smith?
Yeah, I think if you know me, I'm usually inclined to unpack that duality, women and minorities, because they are minority women. So I prefer the intersectional lens, as actually Imogen's comments alluded to. I mean, she took it, she practiced it with her comments. So if I think about, say, racialized minorities, even here we would have to disaggregate the data, because I mean, studies out of the US, for one is we see the problem of Canada not having what so-called race-based data, the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on racialized minorities. So the Canadian Jack Webb, the Association of Canadian Studies did a study recently that said over 1/3 of visible minorities knew someone who had COVID-19. This is perhaps no surprise given that many racialized people are on the front line, are most likely to use public transportation or to be in low wage work, or the ways in which migrants, for example, are disproportionately impacted, whether in meatpacking plants or Amazon facilities in Calgary. So, I mean, so there's a disproportionate impact on racialized minorities. And also we see this phenomenon emerging in the context of around what's called COVID racism. So this is where, I mean, in one sense, we've seen where, say, people of Chinese or Southeast Asians were seen as model minorities. But as with the emergence of COVID-19 and the kind of impoverished leadership in the United States, there was talking, just discussions around Kung flu and COVID, other forms of COVID racist slurs, we've seen people being beaten up. So in addition to all the other risks we all face collectively, some racialized minorities are being disproportionately impacted by just virulent racism. We also see with studies in the US and UK that, say, Black population, the pre-existing inequities in income and in the society are having disproportionate impacts. We need to understand the social determinants of health and think about how racism is one aspect of that. But I also want to think about the universities. And I was thinking even early on, the ways in which, say, persons with disabilities, either as professors or students, were impacted by COVID-19. So for example, we were slow in thinking about accessibility, or what do you need if you need sign language interpretation or Braille. How has COVID-19 impacted those learners or those teachers? If we think about LGBTQ youth, for example, who had moved away from home and who found home places as unsafe, now they have to find a living arrangement. And again, think of income, the ways in which people who didn't have access to technology or Wi-Fi, I know there's an urban rural limits in terms of Wi-Fi too, but if you don't have access to private computers, if you use the library's computer or lab computer at universities, your access then to the teaching and learning will also limited. So income also influenced it. But if you're international students, you see what happened when they had to move out of residence hall. Where are you going to go? How are you, if you are learning English as a second language, how is your learning experience being experienced? So I think there's all kinds, so the minorities are multiple and intersecting. And I think we haven't begun to grapple with it, in large part because we don't have good data and we don't have good emphasis on the so-called other equity groups who are racialized minorities, indigenous, LGBTQ. And I think this COVID-19 has confirmed for us, if we needed it again, that we need more attention to each of these groups and the ways in which good data matters.
Okay, so the last question, second part of this from me, and then I want to turn it to the audience for their questions, and we have already received a number of those. I want to ask you your analysis about the response from the management of research enterprise in Canada to COVID-19. How do you rank that response for this particular challenge, the disproportionate impact on women and other minorities for people within science enterprise? How this response, in your opinion, has been or not tailored toward addressing this particular challenge and dealing with that? Dr. Smith, maybe we can start with you.
Well, so I actually think, the granting agency, SSHRC, NSERC, CIHR, did respond, I think, in terms of extending scholarships, postdocs, grants from those agencies. I think the CRC program also responded by providing a stipend for EDI initiatives. I actually don't think enough has been done, in large part to us actually disaggregate the disproportionate impact on various groups. So my suspicion is we will know more about women undifferentiated, not intersectionally, and the impact of COVID-19 than we will know, for example, about LGBTQ. So I want to know what happens with different family forms. We know that women, generally speaking, do most of the housework or homework, and that's intensified during COVID-19. But is that also true for lesbian families or gay families or blended families? What happens to low-income, say, assistant professors who might not have the facilities at home or the space at home to teach, but also have very young children? We don't know those kinds of impacts. But I also know we do not have good, universities haven't been collecting the data, and Canada hasn't been collecting the data. So we don't really have a good grasp, and I think we need to do more in the months ahead to find out how racialized minorities, diverse racialized minorities, how Black Canadians are doing, how Filipinos or Japanese or Arab. And we also need more to find out how diverse people with diverse disabilities, people with visual disabilities or part of deaf culture, how they're experiencing this. And so I think the granting agencies have made a step, but they, in concert with universities and colleges, will need to do much more. And that means that their EDI offices need to be much more robust, because many of them experience cutbacks during COVID-19, and some have been devastated by this. So it just raises the question about the depth of commitment to EDI in our higher education system.
Dr. Coe?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say EDI offices are typically under-resourced. They don't have enough authority. Yeah. And that's a perpetual problem. I would say that the response from the Tri-Councils has been mixed. I think NSERC, to their credit, moved quickly. And that was a good thing, to move fast, to recognize that there is an issue, to put some things that they had the ability to put them in place quickly. And so I think that was good. I think CIHR made the baffling decision to cancel the spring competition. I think that was, I will be generous and I'll say that was baffling, perplexing, because those were grants that were already in place with work that had been done by members of that group. Now that most impacted group, potentially. Women with small children, parents with school-age children, that kind of thing, to cancel that competition and then say, well, now we're going to reschedule it when nobody or very few people have the ability to actually put in an application, was probably a bit of a misjudgment. I think the rapid distribution of very significant amounts of research through research money through CIHR may have exacerbated some of the inequities that are already in place in research culture in the biomedical sciences. I think we won't know that for sure. I worry about the EDI and SGBA plus rigor in terms of evaluation of some of those very fast-tracked proposals. I think we, again, won't know the impact of some, the outcomes or some of those decisions. I think the processes and the policies are difficult. It's hard to know exactly what the right decision is in the moment. So the responses have been mixed. I think the university sector has really struggled with this. I think some universities have done better than others. I really worry very much that now EDI as a sort of initiative is now put on the side until we get through this, and then we'll start thinking about it again, which is, I think, completely the wrong approach, because if you're EDI infused, EDI embedded, you will be better prepared. You will be better able to come out of this in a healthy, kind of holistic way. But I'm not sure that there is that, depth of sort of real understanding and application within the Canadian post-secondary sector. So I think we can be quite critical, and we can expect better. I think we can expect better. There needs to be better. So yeah, I'll give them a mixed review.
Okay, thank you for that. And let me just turn it to the audience. We have already received 5 questions, and please use the Q&A box in the bottom of Zoom screen to write your questions. I read them out loud, and feel free to vote them up if you like any question, if it's your question. Meantime, my colleagues at CSPC will run as a short survey, one question, which sector you're coming from. This data helps us to perform better in future for our sessions. And if you are from nonprofit, private, government, academia, media, or other, please respond to that question. Now, the first question that voted 3 times, I guess, with an anonymous attendee, as tenured faculty, how can we support higher education power in moving beyond performative steps toward deep system level change? As precarious faculty, graduate students, undergrad students, your response. Whoever wants to take this.
That's a systems response. So Dr. Smith, what can each sector do in terms of overall academia? I mean, I could talk about science, but
to make system change into the whole system.
Yeah. So I mean, I think because my view is, I think if we follow from Dr. Cole's last response, which is to say about the mixed response, I think we are at the moment in Canada where universities collectively must do better. Right now, so the whole higher education system, but I would say that's also true of the schools, because I mean, I'm in Alberta, so there's some differential impacts, because precisely at the moment of COVID, there will be cuts being made to schools, hospitals, nurses, doctors, as well as significant cuts to universities, which made us unable to respond with the same kind of it's in the same ways that other provinces have been. But the higher education system, there are many things we are doing individually, which are much better done collectively. And so we aren't collaborating. Needs to be done. I'll just give you, my own critique is that these are really not fully fledged EDI offices. They do 1 or 2 equity seeking groups. But if they want to do, say, 5 equity groups, as they ought to be doing, it is much better, say, data collection. Most don't collect data. Most don't consult with the designated groups. So they're developing principles about them, but out them. Most don't have people with expertise. This is an Imogen, Dr. Cole mentioned earlier that they are low down the totem pole. So many EDI leads are not at the decision-making table. And I've already looked at some examples of committees that are developed in order to take institutions out of the COVID-19 moment into this new terrain, post-COVID terrain. And most of them actually are homogenous. Few of them have attended to what an EDI lens would look like. So in my view, these universities will be further behind in advancing a more equitable academy than they even are now. And I actually think we need to get away from the one-size-fits-all approach to EDI. It is not working. It has not worked in 30 years. So we need people to start saying, what does racial equity require? That's a system-wide approach. What does disability justice require? And again, you see the level of expertise that's needed, knowledges, research, experiences, then you would know that an office with 1 or 2 people in it is not going to get us there. And an office without a budget, under-resourced, is not going to get us there. So I think this kind of very, the kind of checkbox approach to EDI that we currently experience is not working. And it's not working, not just in science. I mean, in science, but I would say in humanities and social sciences, there's very little movement except for gender, perhaps, and gender diversity. And even there, it's very modest.
You want to add something?
Yeah. So I just follow on that, because the question was what a tenured professor would do, and structure. You know, a tenured professor can do something that a graduate student can't. So I mean, I think it's really important.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear that. Yeah.
learn what you can do at your level. And one thing that tenured professors can do, tenure is a massive privilege. Tenure is a massive privilege and platform to allow you to speak to issues with a lot of protection that other people don't have. Graduate students don't have, adjunct faculty may not. So a tenured professor can speak to these issues. So I'm often sort of taken aback when people say the universities should be doing something. And I always want to remind people that universities are made up of people. So you are the university. So when people say the university should be doing something, it's like, well, what are you doing? So if you sit on a hiring committee, you can require everybody, or you can at least request or make a statement that everybody on that hiring committee have core competencies around EDI awareness. So you can ensure that it's built into your hiring processes. Now that's going to be different across different universities because hiring processes may or may not be codified in a collective agreement. But you can speak to the issue of wanting to hire people that know how to do inclusive design, particularly if you're somewhere like Toronto where you have this incredibly diverse population of students. So if you don't know how to do inclusive design, don't really care who you are, what you look like, whatever. We are hiring people with core competencies around EDI principles and the application of them. So that's what you can do as a tenured professor. As a graduate student, you can ask your program for allyship training, for bystander training, just as you should be giving professional development training for your trainees, postdocs as well. So there are all sorts of actions that can be done at different levels by people, but you have to be willing to do the work and learn. And sometimes it means getting really uncomfortable about, you know, where we're at in the academy in Canada. Anti-racism training is gonna make you uncomfortable if you are a white person with privilege like me. And that's a good thing. People need to get uncomfortable and be having some of these open conversations. And as a tenured professor, you can drive some of that. And if you don't know how to do that, send me a message and I'll give you some ideas.
If I can add that to that though, I mean, I see, right, in the case of Indigenous and racialized minorities who were severely underrepresented in the Canadian Academy and who have raised these issues in the past and seen them intensified in the academy, the kind of microaggressions people experience, the kinds of cultural tax that's exacted for doing this kind of work, the sense in which now we are being asked to compile reading lists for our white peers, it still means a disproportionate burden placed within the academy, which is why I put the onus on institutions actually to develop ways in which our hiring committees must be much more accountable for the outcomes so that people aren't engaging in the reproduction of the same, so that our graduate committees are saying, how diverse is this pool? Because this is the next generation that we are socializing to be in the disciplines. And so even at the graduate level, I think you're right, graduate students, I think, tend to do a lot more, and even undergraduate a lot more. But again, whether they've been heard and whether their views have been taken seriously by the academy is a question mark for me, because I think these anti-racism statements that were produced by universities, often, even those statements were produced without any dialogue with Black professors or racialized professors or Indigenous professors. So we have a lot of work to do at that level. So and again, I think institutions have been giving us a one size fits all because they haven't done the deep thinking necessary to advance a much more complex view of EDI in the academy.
So on that note, there's a question by Samar Sani Najad. Many individuals within research institutes who are working on developing EDI initiatives, practices within our organizations are doing it as an add-on to our job. What tips do you have for us to be successful in our newly found roles within our organizations? Any of you would like to take that question?
So I'm not quite clear, newly found roles specifically doing EDI, or I think, yeah, I mean, a lot of people are doing it as an add-on off the side of the desk, and that's a problem. It is a skill set. It is a specific area of scholarship, including in the sciences. So, and I mean, for a long time it has been in the social sciences and humanities, a huge body of scholarship and research, which, you know, can be incorporated. So it shouldn't be an add-on. It shouldn't be off the side of the desk, but it does need to be informed. It does need to be driven by expert, you know, scholarship and research, and so not just.
So
Doctor, you are.
She froze.
Yeah. So you go ahead.
So if I may add to that, so the way I understand that question is, go ahead.
And we'll recognize it. So the reward and recognition structures in the academy need to be fixed. You know?
All right, thank you. Dr. Aku, you were frozen for one moment, and now we have you back. That's okay. Now, Dr. Smith, you want to add something to this?
Yeah, I do think, like I said, I'm a political scientist trained in international relations and political philosophy. So to add on to what Dr. Ko just said, I spent most of my career doing this work as a side. And as a consequence, you could say I developed a third field of a study, which is to say I started writing, researching, and publishing in the area of EDI. But the work that I did and the experience that I garnered was seen as community engagement, seen as a service, not very highly valued. It's now valued more today, but not over the past year. So that many people who are doing this work are coming from different disciplines. They have they have done little reading. They don't know the body of research, but they want to make a difference. And so the training programs that are in universities tend to be very limited, tend to be implicit bias. They aren't anti-oppression training, and they're usually one-offs. So the kind of widespread, system-wide approach to moving EDI from a few good individuals doing good work to a systems-wide approach to actually affecting change, to actually measuring results, to actually tracking how don't see much. A handful of universities perhaps are doing that, but by and large, we are expecting people to sacrifice a service and do this work. And they may do good in a program or field of study or one area, but it's not across the system. And so again, I think the lens that we bring to this work, and I keep calling it work, it's hard work, difficult conversations, difficult to get policy changes, difficult to get Office of Safe Disclosures that will hear people's complaints, take them seriously and act upon them. Difficult to get consequences for people who do wrong. So I want to say we actually need to do much more. And I want to say it would be much more productive for institutions if they collaborated to say, okay, together, how can we do better around, say developing policies or developing data collection mechanisms which are disaggregated? Or how can we do better in terms of thinking about which should be the consequences for people who engage in sexual harassment or racism? There needs to be consequences. But that also means that our leaders must educate themselves rather than outsourcing EDI to one individual who is actually low in the totem pole of power. It actually means we must look at ourselves and say, are we modeling the change we are advocating for institutions? And if we were, why are university leadership teams, from chairs to deans to vice president to president, so homogenous? I'm putting pressure on university leaderships. They simply must do better.
Thank you. I just want to ask a question that was repeated a couple of times by, I guess, young researchers, Stephanie Chung, and as well as, I believe, Danielle Nadine. The question is about the early career professionals who are motivated to create change, but may be unheard. And what would be your advice for them so that they make sure that, you know, they are being heard and they can just change the imbalanced system of power? where they work. Do you have any advice for graduate students or early career researchers in that?
I actually think universities tend to listen to students, especially undergrad and grad students, more than they tend to listen to professoriate in times. So when students say they want a more equitable experience in the classroom, they want professors that are role models, that are mentors, that they can see themselves in the institution, whether they're Indigenous students, whether they're racialized students. The best way to say, is it possible, is to actually see someone who's a professor. But the other thing is, as experiences around racism in particular, I wanted to draw upon, where students have come to my office to say they haven't been able to find a place where they will be heard. And if they are heard, it's dismissed and it goes nowhere. I think students, it's better than not to do it as an individual. If you can, it's actually better to do it through a student association, or better to do it in concert, to organize with a collective of like-minded people. You can do your own reading and you can do your own advocacy. But individuals can be swallowed up in the system, become exhausted. So I don't want to minimize the challenge of an individual reporting such a thing, but also to ask for curriculum change in your department, right? Why, the whole body of movement around why is my curriculum so white, or the whole hashtag Black in the Ivory, or racism on campus hashtag. They tell us the challenges that students have making a complaint or trying to effect change. And I actually think, again, I'm going to put the onus on leaders. They actually need to listen, and they actually need to structure more opportunities for engagement with the students, graduate students, postdocs, and faculty and staff. So we have a lot of work to do, and again, I think we are not where we ought to be after 30 years.
Dr. Cole, do you have any advice on that for graduate students and early career researchers to be heard, what they can do?
Well, I'm often heard saying you have a voice, you have a right to use your voice, and you have a reasonable expectation that other people will shut up and listen. So I think it's one thing to speak up, but you also have to have the space to speak into. And that's certainly something that leaders should be making available, is spaces for people to speak to it safely. I think as an early career researcher, I think it's very, you can be vulnerable in the sciences. I'm just going to focus on science, STEM. You're trying to get those first grants in place, but I think you can model and train your HQP in a way that is truly inclusive. So you may not be able to affect policy on a grand scale. Policy is hard, but you can certainly run your own research program, do your teaching in an inclusive way, and really model the behavior. And be one of those people that, as somebody described to me recently, be one of those people that you needed when you were a young person, somebody to look to. I often advise people have a lab code of conduct, know how to write the EDI component of your HQP and your NCERT grant. Do that really well, because people are doing a good job now, and know what sex and gender-based analysis in a CIHR grant really is, and do it, and hold your peers to the same kind of level. Question. But what you can do safely, because it's different for different people, and there are microaggressions, and many of us have had experience of feeling threatened in our careers because we spoke up. That can be tricky to navigate. So building a network that maybe of people you can talk to and support you, I think. But don't expect to be able to make great change in a program or a department or a division, and really focus on building the most inclusive research program you can, I think might be something for early career researchers.
Thank you. There's another question about COVID-19 related question to add to your question, to your answers. It says there is a growing evidence that women and people with COVID-19, they are publishing less due to many new exacerbated barriers. What would be your advice to decision makers on how they can measure excellence more inclusively so that underrepresented groups that face these barriers are not excluded from funding opportunities or from academic advancement over the next years? We touched on this. Do you want to add anything to that about the specific recommendations for decision making?
I think this is an important, I'm beginning to call it the COVID generation here during this moment. But I actually think COVID-19 has created a whole cluster or series of things that we will need to monitor in terms of the impact on diverse faculty, students and faculty. So with your question to disabilities, I'm thinking that including, for example, invisible disabilities, like there's a Canada tax benefit for some people. Maybe 40% of people with disabilities were able to access that. People with chronic fatigue weren't able to access it. So some universities are now currently developing surveys where they're trying to assess the impact of COVID-19 on the work that people have been able to do. And I don't know that this is actually going to students, because I want to know the impact of COVID-19 on students' ability to complete courses, even access to courses. Say, if you have the digital divide, that's going to disproportionately impact you. If you're now starting term in the fall and your time zone is 12 hours difference, that's going to impact your learning experience. So I think there's going to be a lot of work done to say how this will impact or extend the tenure timelines, how this will impact how we think about research productivity, especially in universities where they have these merit increment systems. And I think persons with disabilities, different, so whether you're deaf or visual disabilities or hearing, I think there's some attention to using closed caption and other ways of looking at the disabilities. But I don't think enough. What if you're a parent who has a disability and your child has a disability? Again, that's going to be a disproportionate impact because your child doesn't have the support that they would normally get if they had disabilities. So I think we actually need to, this is where data collection becomes really important, but also disaggregated data collection becomes important to charting these differences and adjusting how we respond appropriately, equitably, I should say.
Dr. Cole, do you want to add?
Yeah. And I think at the Tri-Councils levels, I mean, I know there's discussion going on at Tri-Councils about how to evaluate productivity in an inclusive way. I know that discussion is going on, and I think that will continue, and they're going to struggle with it, but they'll come up with guidelines and it'll come out in the next round of reviews and stuff. But it's going to require a lot of education of reviewers. And so that's where I have some concerns is because we already know that some reviewers don't buy into or believe this EDI stuff. So this education of reviewers to take into account the COVID-19 impact on certain groups is going to be a major issue, and I'm not sure, that's going to be a lot of work because the reviewers are us, right? So, and there's a very variable level of understanding and expertise. I also think the universities are going to have to become much more aware, much more creative. Like maybe extending the tenure clock is not equitable. Might be, you have the choice, but actually maybe tenure and promotion committees should be evaluating on the same schedule, but taking it into account, because if you delay this tenure clock, then there's financial impacts, and again, we start to build in those inequities that are already in place. So I think universities are going to have to be really thoughtful and do a deep dive. I think we're going to have to pull in the union leadership as well, because some of these issues are codified in the collective agreement. Hiring, consequences that Dr. Smith mentioned earlier, and things like tenure processes are sometimes very structured and very difficult to shift, or open to interpretation. And so we're going to have to say, we're going to have some deep dive into really mature, highly evolved labor relations types of discussions between university management and union leadership. And I don't think that's happening nearly enough or to the depth that it needs to happen.
Excellent. So as you can see, there has been huge excitement for this session, lots of questions. Unfortunately, the time will limit us with one more question, and you each have 30 seconds to respond. But before that, I want to ask my colleagues at CSPC to launch the survey for the participants to tell us how we perform. Please rank this session and tell us your opinion. And if you have any other idea or suggestion, by all means, please let us know. And so the last question is, on a very general note, I guess, one of the impediments of, sorry, just let me make sure I got the right question. Right, so we have recognized that EDI is crucial in many aspects in work settings and life in general. How come we are lagging behind in implementation of it? How can we get specific actions that either of you would recommend to empower and achieve EDI in Canada, in particular in scientific community? Please, 30 seconds each or 45 seconds each.
I think universities can't get around having a better improved EDI infrastructure, which is, and the infrastructure could be fluid. But I actually believe, since EDI is everybody's work, we say that, but then we don't say, okay, but still we need to think of how we organize in order to get things done. So I actually believe we need to be using the expertise within the academy, the students, staff, and faculty much more. So I think of teams. You need better data collection? Well, you have sociologists, scientists, political scientists. They can do the best survey you can think about in your own institution, knowledge and expertise. You need policy change. Well, you have people in business, in policy studies, in education policy studies. Put up together a team and get change to, and develop the best policies you can. But wouldn't it be better if Universities Canada oversaw and Royal Society or the granting agencies all work in concert to thinking about different kinds of models for different kinds of institutions around affecting change? But I also think universities can have to do a lot more deep thinking and practice around an infrastructure that gets the terrible things flushed out and to get the good practices flushing through the academy.
Thank you. And Dr. Cole?
Well, we have to value it. We have to say it's a priority, not a nice to have. We have to value it, we have to reward it, we have to recognize it, and we have to have consequences and accountability. And if you don't do it, if you don't embed it, if you're not demonstrating it, if you're not actionable, enough with the research, enough with the reports, enough with the, nice things to have, if you don't action it and there aren't measurable outcomes, then there are consequences. You don't get money, you don't get awards. What if we had a ranking system for universities that measured EDI? Universities are obsessed with rankings. Let's make a new ranking system that rates universities on EDI, application and integration and embedding. Universities, that would be a real incentivization. So value it, reward it, recognize it, have accountability and consequences for not doing it, hire people who have it as a core competency, put leaders in place who have it as their number one core competency, in addition to all those other things that we always say we're looking for.
So that's an excellent suggestion for Maclean's annual ranking of the university. With one of those boxes for EDI. Excellent suggestion. We make sure that they hear this and they hear you, Imogen, and you should help them to evaluate that. And that yes, so that brings us to the end. The next session will be an interview with Dr. John Hupper, the CEO of MyTax, the new CEO of MyTax, on driving innovative solutions for economic recovery during and post-COVID-19 on Monday, July 13th, 2020 at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Please make sure the link is provided in the chat line. Make sure you register for that session. I want to thank extensively Dr. Smith and Dr. Ko for this excellent conversation, and I want to make sure that we have you booked for sometime in August or September on a panel specifically on solutions to the ADI in a more kind of comprehensive discussion. And hopefully we can arrange that with you for sometime in near future with maybe other panelists. As you can see, there is a huge appetite and interest in this topic, as it should. And we at CSPC have made sure that this EDI issue is on top of our activities with respect to especially convening power at the conferences and virtual sessions. And we hope to continue doing that with your help and support. Any final word?
Thank you. Well, if I can get universities to do one thing, is to take the suggestions we have proposed and add them to their Dimensions EDI pilot program, Dimensions EDI implementation in universities.
Thank you.
I second that. I second that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful afternoon and look forward to see all of you in the next session. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.